Okay, better this time. This is going to be a slightly different one. I am not chasing after a particular mission, but I'm trying to set up the next tools. And I believe that the next thing that we need to do is get to Mun. I am thinking that as a sequence of things, I should, get a satellite to do a flyby, and then modify that to send up a Kerbal doing a flyby, and then send a Kerbal up into orbit, or maybe get a satellite into orbit first. If I were not turning on the constant connection to the archive, then getting satellites into orbit would be number one task. So for instance, we would have set up a bunch of kerbosynchronous satellites first, and then I'd be putting satellites around Mun, and then I'd be doing my manned flyby, and then my manned orbit. In any case, unless we're going to stop and do a whole bunch of satellites, which is, we could do that. I want to stretch my wings and get out to Mun. I started building a spacecraft with the parts I had available, and I realized that probably could be done, but it'd be much easier if I unlocked 2 more bits of science. And that was the larger engines and larger fuel tanks and the fuel handling. And that opens up an exciting possibility of supporting onion staging. Now, onion staging is where you have a craft. I'm going to start off with something really simple. The next mission is going to be Justly Cluttered Hull, which will be a generalized mission to go out to somewhere, and basically we've got Mun and Minmus out there, so this is going to be /Mun, so it's going to go to Mun. So I'll have a script in Justly Cluttered Hull that will go to a moon, and in /Mun I'll have a little configuration script that says, oh, your target is Mun. I have another one in Minmus, target is Minmus. So that's how that'll work. Anyway, so we started that. Onion staging is you take something like this. Now obviously we're not going to do it with this stage, but what if we add another, oops, where'd it go? Coupling. Add a coupling over here. Oh, let's do it out this way. If we just did that, we'd have, fix the staging. When you hold the Alt key and click on something, it creates a copy of it. And that copy includes where in staging it is, so when I copied this guy, the engine remembered that it was in stage 2, and this engine's now in stage 4. Let's set this up to be symmetric. So here's something we've built before. We've built stuff like this before, where these outside engines are going to burn, and when they've exhausted their tank, they'll fall away, and the middle tank will, the middle engine will burn. What if, hear me out, I could have all 3 engines burning, and then when the outside tanks were full, they would fall away, and my middle engine would continue to burn. If only we could move fuel from the outside engines to the inside one, so when the center guy started to burn, it was full. So the net effect would be all 3 engines burning on these 2 fuel tanks. That would give us better thrust, and it would mean that we can have basically beefier chunks of fuel available to us per engine. Well, let's see what happens here. So this is a stage that has a thrust to weight ratio of 0.23. Oh, let's do it with a real engine that we can get a positive thrust to weight ratio on, so we can watch what happens. Let's see, T45, that would give some steering. And a thrust to weight ratio of 2.27. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for purposes of exploring the onion staging, I'm going to create an initial stage 2 that is a thrust-to-weight ratio that is just above 1. 1.42, close enough. I suppose I could go for one more. 1.2. So this guy would barely be able to get off the launch pad. And if I replicated him, let's put a coupler out here. This is going to be long and bendy and really impossible to fly, but this is going to be mainly for delta V purposes. Oh, and he wants to go in the top end. If we were going to fly this, I would need all sorts of frickin' struts. So 2 of these. This engine is this guy. So if I did this, this guy wouldn't even be able to lift us. I'd have to go to 2. Let's go to 2. We're going to build this the old way, and then we're going to see what happens when we go to onion staging. So now we've got 2 of them thrusting, still only 0.86. Oh no. Well, let's do something funky here. Let's go down to our fuel. And the new part that we have unlocked that is interesting is this fuel duct, which is going to say move fuel from this guy to this guy. I'm just going to point it down like that. I'm just making that long so we can see what direction the arrow is going. That basically is saying that during flight, if this guy has any fuel, we're going to pack it into this guy in the middle. This will tend to keep the guy in the middle full. This will take from the whole stack and will feed into the whole stack. And I am very uncomfortable with blind tops. So we've done that. That didn't change anything yet. We're still at 0.86 and 1.2. Well, what happens now if we take this engine and we move it down? We're going to do this based on MechJeb's listing, and I'm going to go to the short stats. So now, with all 3 engines burning at the beginning, hold on, let's look at MechJeb for comparison first. Let's make this proper comparison. So this says, in this configuration, MechJeb says we have a thrust-to-weight ratio of 1.1 out of our 2 engines. This MechJeb and KSP are disagreeing on our thrust-to-weight ratios. I'm going to use the numbers out of MechJeb, just because MechJeb will give me more precision in some places, and I'm going to compare apples to apples. So apples to apples, this configuration with these 2 engines is 1.1, and they would burn, and when they're done, we'd have 1.53 out of the middle. If we start burning this first engine here, now look what happens. Now with 3 engines going instead of 1.1, we've got 1.64. So we've got a better thrust-to-weight ratio for that first stage. Second stage, we've still got 1.53, because it'll still be this engine. And let's take a look at delta V numbers this time. With them separated, 1700 and 2954. We're all in atmosphere here. We're not going to get very high with this configuration. So 1700 and almost 3000 for a total of 4600. And now if I move it down, that's interesting. It's giving me, oh, right. So the delta V is based on the difference in mass, which we didn't change, and the difference in how much fuel we're burning, which we didn't change. So we get exactly the same delta V. So moving the engine, moving the lower numbered higher stage engine down to a lower stage does not change our delta V. It does change our thrust-to-weight ratio. It helps our thrust-to-weight ratio. It gets us more thrust, and we get the same delta V in every stage, which means that's a net win. Yay! The fact that it doesn't change delta V is going to simplify the math in some places. Well, we can go further than this. That's just with 2. What if I grab this guy and put in 4 more. I'm going to put in 2 more stages of him. Oh, I need to know where to put him. It's kind of hard to do 6-way symmetry by eye for me. So what I like to do is put in a little guy like that and say put him 6-way, and now I've got a place to line up. So we're going to put him in. He's 2-way symmetric, but he's going to be right there, and I want to line him up as best I can with the other guy and take his fuel is going to feed from him to his neighbor next door. So let's start from here, and he's going to feed over this way. So what have we got now? Well, everybody starts off at the beginning, and come on, these guys are going to burn down here. So now, our first stage, we have gotten a lot heavier. Boom, we added a stage. Our thrust to weight ratio is still 1.6 because we added a bunch of mass and we added an engine, and it's the same configuration. We're dominated. We went from 3 engines with 3 stacks of fuel to 5 engines with 5 stacks of fuel. So we're still at a thrust to weight of 1.67. And our delta V has gone way up. Okay, let's I should have taken a snapshot and kept it on the screen. So now we've got 889 for all 5 of them. And then we dropped 2 of them. And now we're back to the original 1600 original configuration. We have full fuel of our original configuration. We got the 1600 and the 2900 right there. And we can cross-check that if I take this guy off. I blew up something. What did I mess up? I think MechJeb is confused. Yeah, okay, there's our original configuration. MechJeb can get confused. Software has bugs, and we're doing weird things. So yeah, so here's our original configuration, 1696, 2930. So by adding this onion stage here, I wish I could add with symmetry and then break. I wish I could add with symmetry and then break symmetry. Oh my goodness! Let's do that. Okay, let's set up things so that we can use symmetry properly. So he is going to be set up with 6-way symmetry. Okay, and kind of center him up. Then what we're going to do is we are going to remove all of these from symmetry. What I really want is for them to be 2-way symmetric. Fudge. Yeah. Okay. What I'm trying to do is hard. What I want to take 6-way symmetry and turn it into 3 2-way symmetries, and I don't even know if that's possible. So we are going to. We're going to go back to the 2-way. I'm sorry. That was a waste of time. Now I like starting my builds by putting it out here, getting it lined up like that. This way, in theory, I could put fins on these that were this way symmetry. Mirror symmetry now works left to right on this guy. So I could put 2 fins on him, and it would just be 2 fins. It would be like that. Since we're not flying it, wait a minute. hey, let's actually fly this sucker when we get out there. So I'm going to go ahead and put the basic fin on. What I want is for this basic fin to be slightly tilted this way, so that when we jettison this guy, the engine will be kicked out. No, I've done that the wrong way. So the top will be kicked out. And what I want to do is I want to make sure the engine doesn't kick out further. So we're going to push him in a little bit. That will cause them to do this. It will tend to stabilize at kind of an outward angle. The engine is being pushed in, but remember it's pushing in on the back of something that's aerodynamic. So they will tend to widen out. So this should kick our stages away from us. And now we can take this and we can go two-way symmetric. Here, normal two-way symmetry. And I'm going to, how about I line it up with the horizon and line the nose up with the middle of the heat shield. So there's my point. So that's where I will set it up. Oh, this is going to be a trick because where is the horizon over this way? Oh, well. Close enough. So now we're back to our configuration again. I'm going to grab this and two asymmetric. We're going to put him in. I guess I can just line up the black bands on the nose cone left to right. And then we fix the fuel line. Okay. Now, this currently has all of these guys on the same one. I want to put this down below. So now we're back to 1629. We got 800. We're adding 800 meters per second by adding this pair. We have not changed the delta V on the upper stages. We have not changed the thrust-to-weight ratio on the upper stages, and we still have the same thrust-to-weight ratio down here. But you'll notice, going from 3 engines to 5 engines, we only added half as much delta V because you're lifting more fuel. And we'll do this one more time. And line up the black bands. And there we go. And now we fix the staging. And there's the new separators. And we went and added another 604 meters per second. So every time we're doing this, what that's also doing is making it so that our topmost stage is more likely to be at a higher altitude. But look at how much budget we've got on these first 3 stages. 604, 888, 1694. It takes about 3,400 delta V to get circularized at 80 kilometers. So I usually budget about 2,000 to get our apoapsis out there, and another 1,000-ish to get circularized, and then there's extra stuff. So 2,000 would be 6 and 8. Another 7-ish hundred. So we'll get about halfway through the third pair, leaving us another 800 meters per second. So stages 5, 4, and 3 should get us fairly close to circularized, and stage 2 will finish off the circularization, and then we'll have a whole bunch left. Now, stage 2 is clearly going to be all vacuum. Stage 3 will be fairly high, so it's going to be more on the 2,000 side than that. Let's get rid of the fins I no longer need. So, staging script needs to look at this and say, we are going to jettison a stage if all of the engines jettisoned with that stage have flamed out. Let me prep my editor here so I can bring it up. See, that is over in phases. This is old code that we have not touched in a very, very long time. What I'm looking for is BG Stager. There it is. It's easier for me to do this stuff on a larger screen, and then I can bring it over here where I've got fewer rows and columns available and size it out and make the print bigger. There's our background stager. Now, I was trying to muck with the background stager so that it wouldn't discard the stage with the parachutes on it. So I want it to stop when there's no more useful things it can do. But what I've noticed in missions right now is that this is not discarding the last engine to burn out for some reason. So a couple things I want to do. If we currently have no engines attached whatsoever, we are done. Stop trying to stage. We are not going to discard anything. We have no more engines available. We're done. Stage number, if it's less than 2, well, there's our problem. Typically with these stacks, stage 0 has my parachute, and stage 1 has a decoupler that gets rid of everything that I don't need to land with. So here's our problem. Just need that to be if S is less than 1. So again, if we get down to we have decoupled at stage 1, we can return. We're done. So there we go. There's our stager. Let's see what it does. Turn off the editor. We are going to save this and explore. This eventually is going to head to the moon. A very different configuration, but we're going to keep this one going. Oh, and I need a script for this. I actually started one for Justly Cluttered Hall. What I did for this script was I grabbed the rescue script and chopped out all the middle crap. So all I have left is the part to get to circular orbit, and I've got something that'll go put us in map view and tell me to hit a abort button to return, and then I've got all of the deorbit stuff just exactly the way it was in the rescue mission. This normal deorbit descent and landing may become something where I just have a mission thing where I can say, add the normal descent and deorbit stuff. Thank you. For target selection, same thing, but I changed all of it from rescue this and rescue that to just mission this and mission that. And my load file that I do is I have a file called target, not a file called rescue. I should have named it more generically. But we do the same thing. We get the mission target and mission target. Get the mission target and we grab its semi-major axis because we use that. We set the parameters for match because we are going to use the match package to match our inclination and then to match our apoapsis. Remember, our goal here is to go visit Mun, but for right now, we're just getting up to a circular orbit. This should be enough to show the staging at work. Oh, and I just showed you a whole bunch of stuff with VS Code turned off. So, here's what I was talking about with the mission target selection and the match package. I am going to launch to 120 kilometers, which is a nice convenient altitude that's not too close to the atmosphere. It gives me a lot of fudge factor leeway. And I believe the rest of it I already talked about. Now we can turn it off. Who's flying this heap? We've got Jebediah. Well, Jebediah will get to fly every time we forget to change it. Let's start from the bottom. We rescued a whole bunch of people. Let's set Aerofall out. So Aerofall gets to sit on top of this explosive stack that has quite a lot of delta V. If this is controllable, which it may not be, this is actually enough delta V to do quite a lot. 7,800 meters per second is a lot of delta V. But let's see what we've got when we get there. Uh, so my expectation, we're going to predict this, is that we will circularize our orbit, and about halfway through circularization, we will go from stage 3 to stage 2. Launch. Boom. Black screen, black coffee. Okay, there's our normal pad hold until we are matching inclination with the MUN, with the target. We got there, we did a countdown, and let's take a look at our delta V stats, which are here. It'll be kind of small unless you're watching this in 4K. That's a wobbly stack. We need some struts. I wasn't thinking of flying this initially. One of the parts I unlocked, I took a quick look at them before the stream, is one of the tapered liquid fuel tanks that goes on the outside of the rocket. You see a lot of Soviet rockets that use those. The Soyuz launches with them. And they're nice and streamlined, and they're tapered, and they're really beautiful. And I think my next launch, I'm just going to shift over to using them because they carry a lot of fuel. So we're wobbly, but we're working. You notice we did manage to properly stage when those first 2 engines went out. Let's watch more carefully as the second 2 engines finish up. You notice our liquid fuel and our oxygen in that tank is going down rapidly, and this tank is staying full, and the center tank should be staying full. And when this one gets down to 0, so I can manually transfer fuel at this point. Notice that I stage these in opposing pairs. You always want to keep your thrust and torque balanced. So if you've had an engine that's off-center one direction, you need to use symmetry to add another engine that's off-center the other direction, or you add several engines whose average position is centered. Yeah, we need to do something about that wobble. Center tank is still staying full. Okay, so we have finished the ascent phase. We have throttled back to a very low throttle, which will maintain our apoapsis at nearly 120. What happens is we get close, we run down the throttle, atmospheric drag slows us down, so the net thrust that we're getting out of our engines until just now was just enough to counterbalance our atmospheric drag, and then afterwards we had very low thrust levels to bring us up to our target. We could avoid that if we told it go too high and then had a hard cutoff that says, okay, we're aiming at 120 kilometers and we're going to thrust until we get up to 125, and then we're going to chop the engines and just accept whatever we have. I kind of like the idea of being precise. So now we're trying to time warp, but you notice we're in physical time warp. I've fixed this in a bunch of places where we enter time warp and we're in physical instead of in rails. And that's one where we should put ourselves on rails, because we don't want to use physics time warp on a wobbly little noodle like this. And now we're circularizing. So we have 3781 delta V. Oh. Okay, so apparently our initial stacks had more than enough fuel to circularize in this configuration. And I'm not sure what it was just doing. I have no idea what it's doing here. It's still circularizing. No, it's in abort to continue. Oh. Okay. The circularization phase locks the throttle and the steering to whatever makes things better. And it doesn't unlock them when it terminates. Let's fix that right now because that's a bug. So we need to go to phases. So two things I wanted to fix. One was the phase warping in phase apowarp, and the other one was the chopping the engine at the end of that. So let's do the phase warping first. So if we are going to warp, what we need to do is set KUniverse time warp. I need to look at the manual real quick. Yeah, I know it's cheating. Bite me. This is KUniverse : time warp. Looking it up in the documents so I get the names right so we don't futz around too much with Greg trying to find the right stuff. Time warp, come on. Structure time warp. Structure time warp has a mode string which is either physics or Rails. So we say if time warp mode equal to physics. Now I don't know if we need to wait in here at all or not. We're going to set to Rails wait 1. This presumes that we are above the atmosphere. So we're going to say if body : body position mag is greater than body ATM. No, too much sugar for a nickel. I will just agree to not use phase apowarp until I am above the atmosphere. Oh, can I agree to that? Phase apowarp happens when we call phase coast. Phase coast happens anytime we're done with phase ascent. Phase ascent is done when apoapsis is high enough and altitude is greater than body atmosphere height. So by the time we get here, we know that we are in space. So there we go. There's the phasing. The other one was circularization. If we terminate circularization, we did not unlock. What we want to do is set our throttle and steering to some neutral stuff. So throttle 0 and steering, well, we could use our rescue pose, actually. Let's actually make that a real supported thing. Where did that go? That's in the pickle script. So here is the steering command for our rescue pose. Just pick up both of those and go back to phases. I'll put in a support script in phases that sets up the pose so we have it available. Function phase pose. So minus S underscore P colon normalized is just the same thing as body position. I'm going to set that to minus. What this will do is it will orient the craft so that its forward axis is along the north vector of the body that we are orbiting. Okay, so we're kind of neutral on the whole concept of whether we're going prograde or retrograde. We're pointed up. This works well with the normal cameras because it'll be pointed up on the screen. The other thing is I am orienting it so the pilot's head faces away from the body we're orbiting. So essentially the pilot will be looking down at the thing we're orbiting. So there is our phase pose. And I'm going to return 0. So we could use phase pose as a phase that sets the pose, or we could just call it. So let's go down here on the termination of ascent. Nope. Coast. Nope. At the end of circularization, I am going to use phase pose. And you can actually return phase pose, which will return 0. Establish the phase and return, move on to the next thing. Circularization with no fuel probably is an abort condition. That's up to the caller. So delta V, and here circularization is complete. I am again going to use return phase pose for that. So if the desired velocity change is good enough, I'm going to turn these back on, because I'm kind of curious to see what those are. I always am, and it's not spam. I've been trying to remove spam from the terminal window. Is there any place where we terminate circularization? So we should have reset it there. So there's phase circ done. Hold brakes to deorbit. I've been changing it so that abort is my consistent signal to my missions to come back home. So no more use RCS or use brakes or so on. It's just going to be abort. Now we go back to, that's Pickle. You can go away. There's my Go script. So what happened here? What happened here was we did phase circ, and we got into, we set map view to true. We saw it flicker to map view, and we said say abort to continue. And I went back to normal view to see my ship doing other things. So I'm going to say phase pose. Put us in our pose. Pose the ship for a selfie. And I'm not going to put it in map view or anything. I'm just going to do that. So we're going to pose. We are going to then switch to a phase that says remind me as the engineer that abort is how to continue this thing, and that's going to refresh every 5 seconds. There we go. So that's fixed up the scripts. So now the question is, what do we want to do about this spacecraft? Let's redesign the spacecraft just a little bit to work with the better script. I could rerun the same mission again, but we would have the stuff that we noticed on this guy. He's really wobbly. I mean, really wobbly. But the idea works. So, revert flight to vehicle assembly. Now, what are we going to do differently here? Well, the first thing is we have this really sweet little part that I want to use. This fuel tank right here, the FLC 1000. It looks really nice. So, the problem is it is big. Let's get rid of all of this. His output, he is actually too big to go 6 around the things of the size that we had. So, well, let's start with a small normal top stage, fuel tank. Let's use, oh, I've got the FLT 800. Okay. Do the 800 and a space engine. So there's a good 3,000 meters per second of vacuum delta V right there. Now, it doesn't have a whole lot of thrust to weight ratio. I mean, just short of 1. But as long as this is operating in orbit, so this guy would take us around, dealing with the Mun capture and maybe even Mun, transfer to Mun, transfer back from Mun, the Mun capture. Those are like 800 or 900 to get there, 800 or 900 to get back, and a couple hundred to move in and out of orbit. So he's kind of cool and he's efficient, and then we want to have something bigger down below him. Coupling, decoupler, boom. And now fuel tanks. We need one that flares a bit. Sort this by size. Got our little teeny stuff up here. This guy is a slightly, is adapter to a slightly bigger fuel tank. And I think it's that size. So him and this tank is going to be too big for us. What are our engines? See, I think that this guy and this guy are the same size. That's what I really want. If I put this around 6, I want the same size thing. I could go bigger. What have I got in the way of engines? By size. Well, we have the Bobcat, which is this size. That's actually a decent little engine. So he is 310 ISP in vacuum and 290 on the ground. So he's a decent, he would be a decent engine to use for here. Okay. So those guys, he's good for atmospheric work. What do I got that's bigger? Well, we've got the Skipper. Oh, he's real big. Can I go to the bigger size here? Let's see. Fuel tanks. What I really want was a fuel adapter that went all the way out to the big guy. So he goes out to the smaller guy, and he goes out to the bigger guy. So, oh, this is just calling out to me to have an interstage here that's this size. Let's do this. Okay, so FLT 900. Let's put a couple of these on and build us up a stage that'll do some decent work for us. So this stage, stage 4, is sitting a thrust weight ratio of 1.85 and 2,200 meters per second. He's kind of a shorty, but that's great. We're building a big stack here. And now we put in a coupler. I could put more stages on there. In fact, why not? How much can I put on here and still have a thrust to weight ratio that's decent? Well, where did that come from? There's a thrust to weight ratio of 1.5. I think what I saw from the other ascent was that running a thrust to weight ratio 1.x for low x, not tiny x, but for low x is not too bad. That looked like a reasonable ascent and circularization when we did it. So there's our stage 4. Now, if we move all this stuff around, I could put him here. No, I could put him here. We're going to start compressing our stages up a little bit. And we do that. Well, if we do that, that means that separating here would also pop the chute, and that's not going to be what I want to do. So we've got chute, we've got discard the last transit stage, we've got the engine of the last transit stage, which activates when we discard him without delay. We've got this engine here, and I want a decoupler. That's, yay, I picked up the right size just by accident. And now we want to put in that. So now we have an even bigger fuel tank. And we can start adding rock-up axes. And we have tanks with stripes and tanks without stripes. And I'm interested to find out what kind of delta V I'm going to get off of this. Delta V and thrust to weight ratio and all of that. So we have two engines of this size, the Poodle and the Skipper. There's the Skipper. The Skipper has a not too great atmospheric capability, 280. Just goes 280 to 320. It's pretty good. And it's getting us a thrust to weight ratio of 0.91 on that stack. And the Poodle, which is two engines, is much lower thrust. Good Lord. So the Poodle is definitely a space-only engine, so we can't use him here. So I'm going to back this off a bit. So there's our Skipper stage. So he's at 1.04. So when he fires, we need to be nice and high. So we need to use enough of these strap-ons to get him up to where he can do his real work. Or we can lower the payload for him so he doesn't have to work as hard. That's actually probably a more appropriate. 1.12 is still small relative to what I'd like to do. I don't want to go any smaller than that. So now we have these guys. So what is our delta V looking like here? This guy has very, very low thrust to weight ratio, but is still has a decent delta V in atmosphere, so we'll be able to use him at high altitude to push our apoapsis out to 120 kilometers. That's what we want him for. And what we're going to want to have on stages 5, 6, and 7 using these guys is enough thrust to weight ratio and delta V to do the rest of the job. So, coupling. I don't really know where this guy couples. Let's take a look. Like that. And then we grab his coupler, and I want to set him up so that his nozzle is level with that nozzle. So where does that wind me up? Here. That's acceptable. I would prefer to have one more length in there. So let's go ahead and accept that our Skipper engine is going to be just barely doing the job. Fuel. It's this guy. Okay. And these engines are way too high in the stack. Apparently, this fuel tank has some engines here, which are probably Sepratron. So one of these guys, it gets us this engine itself. Oh, right. Let's move him up. So this guy on his own is 0.53. So two of them is going to have a thrust weight ratio of 1. By bringing our main engine down into that stack, so together, working together, they're at 1.4. So that's going to be good enough. I am going to plumb these in pairs, as we did before. Let's do 6 of them and see what it looks like. I will have to run the fuel separately in a moment. Oh, I almost forgot. We need to put some fins on to see our six-way symmetry. Can I put him here? Okay, so six-way goes here. I think I can line up that black to white transition just like that. It's going to take some fiddling to get the staging. Oh, bugger. It takes some fiddling to get the staging right. Hold down Alt. Click on that, and we've got a copy of it. There. So all of these engines are going to go down together, and all the ullage motors will go with their various staging points. So we've got 7 engines at the bottom. Well, 13 engines actually, because these guys are this way. Now the first one to fall off is going to be this guy. So that's him and him. So we are going to do this. Okay, so that's the first one we're going to jettison. So he needs to pass his fuel to the right. And I am just going to make this really super simple to see. I do not believe that the fuel lines are subject to air resistance. So we're just going to do that. Okay, now this guy is this separation engine and that separator together, which is the next stage. So he is going to pass his fuel to the right. The trick that I found out a long time ago is if you go to the far side and line this up, it will actually stop it at the near side. Okay. And this guy is here. So we've got all the engines. We've got jettison the first 2, jettison the second 2, jettison the third 2. And then we've got this guy, back up a bit, where we jettison the bottom part entirely and light up the next engine, and then jettison its stage and light up the next engine, and then jettison the last bit and prepare for landing, and then finally we've got parachute. What's coming in at the top is going to be our capsule with our pilot and our control unit. There are going to be smaller control units. We don't have them yet. The other thing we've got at the top, let's reroute on the parachute here, is tucked inside the capsule. I have added a science container, so as we observe, we can toss it in the science container. I have added some extra batteries and some extra control units. I've left the code up there all this time, haven't I? I'm designing a spacecraft. I don't need the code editor up. So there's kind of the core of all of that, and we can clip it together like that. I'm going to leave a little bit of this sticking out the top so I can get a hold of it to put science into it, just like that. So there is our justly cluttered Hall spacecraft, which has a total of over 9,000 space vacuum delta V. And we'll see. You see how little they're derating for these initial engines here. So that's actually very nice. Now let's set up some launch stability, because if we just attach it like this, we're going to bump against it. So we need to attach it down here. And I'm going to put on all of them so that none of them are tensioned differently. There we go. So there's the whole rocket. It's going to sit kind of high off of the ground because I don't really want to be messing around with it. I rerouted it. Let's reroute it back to the control console. Well, as long as I've got it. You run it down until the engines just start to disappear into the ground, then you run it up a bit. So what's the next thing I want to do? Well, I really want to get these engines lit before I start turning off these launch stability enhancers. So let's move them up to the next stage. There we go. And there's our complete staging stack for this rather obnoxiously large spacecraft, which is going to cost us 50,000 funds per launch. But this is an experimental craft, and we will be reverting to the launch each time, so I'm not actually going to be spending that money. We will use something this size when we actually need it. For now, this just gives us a good way to try out a script and to get things into orbit and to work on the next stages of how do we get to the Mun, how do we get to Mun, how do we get back from the Mun, how do we get in orbit around Mun. I will have to work out how I'm going to do a lander. Am I going to land this whole top piece and try to take it off? Will I build a separate lander, Apollo style, and do an Apollo style mission where we have a lander that I deploy and it goes down and it comes back up and then it has to rendezvous? Well, we have code for rendezvous. We did the rescue stuff, so we can rendezvous. We can't dock yet. We'll work on docking at some point. So we'll have to figure that out, and it may very well be that we have to design a craft that can take off from Mun, get to orbit around Mun, get back to Kerbin, and get landed. So it may be that that's the stack we go with. I seem to remember that while in the real world the Apollo configuration is a huge win, in Kerbal Space Program it is not. And definitely when you're talking about going to Minmus, Minmus has a challenge on the orbital inclination, which we've solved. We can ignore the inclination challenge from Minmus, but it's got very low gravity. So for Minmus especially, you just land and take back off and come home. It's none of this, oh, we have to send down something really small and light. Let's give this a shot. We are coming up on an hour. I want to see this work. Going to save and launch. So justly, this vessel has no remote controlled or manned command modules. Cancel. Did I forget to put a crew in? I forgot to put a crew in. So let's toss Jedard in. Thank you for warning me about that, KSP. Now, if KSP is complaining that you don't have a crew or a module, you can't even hit the space bar to initiate launch. And if my KOS scripts initiate a launch, the engines don't actually ignite. They look like they ignite, they sound like they ignite, but you get no actual thrust. Okay, so here is our MechJeb stuff. Oh, he is way too wobbly. Good Lord. I didn't put any struts on this at all, and I am regretting it. So, note one for future. We didn't, had a wobble problem before, and we fixed it by replacing our stacks, but we didn't fix the fact that a long rocket like this is just basically noodly. Our engines are not. Our engines have burned out and they are not being ejected. Why is that? Okay, so let's go back to our stager. Stager's saying, look at all the engines, and if it's decoupled in this stage and is not flamed out, return 1. Oh, these have little ullage motors, the little separator motors that are not yet ignited, and they will ignite when I activate them. So I need to add and E:ignition and not flame out. I think it's ignition. Checking the thing really quick. So structure engine is, where'd it go? Ignition, yes. So we're only interested in engines that have ignited. Ha! Let's save that. So if I continue this, we're not gonna succeed very well. Our thrust to weight ratio is just bad right now. I mean, we are getting. Oh, actually, our thrust to weight ratio is what it was. Most of the parasitic weight is fuel, so it's lower than it should be because we have some dead engines and dead fuel tanks that we're carrying, but it's still working. But I'm suspecting this will not successfully get to where we want to get in the way we want to get there. So notice we've already finished up with our added fuel tanks that were supposed to go away. So this did not do any onion staging because of those Separatron engines. I guess these count as engines, and they would be separated by this. So yeah. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to see if this gets us to orbit. We do have another 1,000 meters per second, so this would use this stage, which is stage 3. Yeah, the next stage up from where we are now will be the one that circularizes us. But the whole point of the onion staging is for us to ditch the empty tanks as we go up. And we're still burning at full because we're trying to push our apoapsis out to 120 kilometers. We are at a very heeled over angle because we are getting close to the top of the atmosphere, and our apoapsis isn't there yet. This is the thing that happens with lower thrust weight. You've seen the rockets I've been using so far, a very high thrust to weight ratio, so we tend to punch right through, and by the time we are at 30 kilometers, we've already gotten our apoapsis. So we finally got it, and we have not yet ejected stages 7, 6, 5, and 4, and we've got, it's not going to eject any of them because we still have all these little itty bitty engines that are going to fire when we separate, and they haven't ignited yet, so they're never going to burn, so they're never going to be ejected. So we have to fix the script, which we've edited already. I'm going to send this back to the vehicle assembly building. We're going to add a couple of struts in to see if we can make it less noodly. Structural, hey you. I want to send struts down. How about this side and opposing it? So we're going to go two-way symmetry. We're going to go from here And I'm going to come all the way down to here. Apparently I can't. Why can't I attach to this tank? Well, it's going to attach to this tank. That's a fairing around an engine. That's a tank. I don't know. Okay, so when it's going to attach to wherever it first collides. Of course it is. Can I strut from these guys all the way up? So if I strut from here, that won't let me. This will strut up to here. Close enough. And this strut, we start from here. Let's start from just under here. I can attach to that same part. Almost. What is the deal with the orientation of that strut? I don't get the orientation of the struts on this at all. Let's see if I clip there first. That looks better. Let's clip there first. There. That's crappy. Okay, something funky is going on with the orientation of the strut connections. Where it wants to be okay over here, but as I bring it over this way, it turns. But that's better. Like, it doesn't want to be on this line at all. What if I bring it down here? Oh, that's the same thing. If I toggle snap, will that perhaps make it so that it is more freeform on where I put it? Slightly. And it looks slightly better too. But you notice I can't put it exactly on that line. Oh my goodness. Something weird about the part geometry right there. So I can set it up there. I can't change toggle snap in the middle though. So yeah, we're gonna be a little wonky here. Okay, it's Kerbal, it's not going to be perfect. Let's see if that's enough strutting to keep us stable. Okay, so the the staging script is now adjusted to, it's looking for not just engines that have flamed out, but engines that are ignited and have flamed out. Okay, so pad hold is complete. Meow. She hasn't decided whether she wants to be picked up or not, but she's meowing. Okay, so let's watch those first engines. And there we go. And I was right. Those are little teeny engines that help separate the stage once you have jettisoned it. And that worked nice and slick. And you notice that our thrust to weight ratio, it will climb as we use fuel. And it's coming up to about 2, which is more like what I'm used to for the launch shape that I've got. Notice that we have a bit of a negative angle of attack here, so we are trying to thrust at a lower angle than our gravity turn would tend to carry us higher. I am thinking that maybe we want to start our gravity turn earlier by saying, instead of start at 90 degrees, start at say 89 degrees, just a little bit heeled over, and start tuning that so that our angle of attack here is small as we go up. The smaller our angle of attack, the more efficient we are, because the less we're going to be fighting the aerodynamics. And there we go. So you notice our apoapsis is now cracking through 80 kilometers, and we are still at 40 kilometer point, so this is much better. What I really want is for us to be close to our apoapsis before we get out of the atmosphere, even for farther ones, especially for 120. We should have our apoapsis out at 120 well before we get out of the atmosphere. We'll still have the engine lit because we're going to still be fighting the atmospheric drag. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and we throttle down. We're within a couple of meters, and we're just going to keep the engine burbling along. We're just above the atmosphere, so now it's just a matter of letting it converge. There, we cut it off. The bell is still going to be shaking around as we are trying to fine-tune our orientation, which will rattle the engine even though it's not thrusting. Because I have the MUN targeted, notice we have the thing saying that's the direction of MUN, and there it is. So if we picked up our nose a little bit, we would be pointing prograde and toward MUN. We haven't even yet started thinking about doing our intercept. But you'll notice that in this bottom stage, we still have 1,000 meters per second, which is my normal budget for circularization. So we may finish circularization. We may or may not be jettisoning stage 4. That may stick around. That may be a stage that helps us with our translunar injection. Of course, we're going to start adding payload to this, which means that our initial stages are going to be used up sooner, and we'll use higher stages to get circularized. So now we are at 120. We are trying to circularize. We do not have attitude control to get ourselves pointed in the right direction to do the circularization. Oh, that's unfortunate. That is really unfortunate. We don't have RCS jets yet. We haven't unlocked them, I think. I'm pretty sure. It could very well be that I need to go revert to before I spent those science points, and instead of taking the fuel control, maybe I need to get RCS jets earlier. Yeah. Okay, so the point of this video was mainly to show off onion staging, which we're not going to be able to do yet because I'm going to revert that out of the game, but also to correct the auto staging script. I believe it's been corrected at this point. If I were to abort, that should send us back to deorbit, and in fact, we still don't have enough attitude control to do anything. So I'm going to manually stage him away. So now our reaction wheels are able to get us into a proper attitude. And what I want to see now is on our final bits, are we going to deploy the chute too soon? We have so much delta V, it's ridiculous at this point. I should have burned off a bunch of delta V before I did this. Okay, so I'm going to jettison him manually. Oh, and he's never going to... Yeah, okay, this isn't a fair test of the staging script at this point, so I can't test the final bits of the staging script with this vehicle. So let's go load the save from before we spent the science. So, yeah, I actually thought I was going to commit to this, so that's why persistent is there. So I need to revert to quick save here. So, script is fixed, but we're not going to spend the money on one of the sciences that we picked up. So what we learned from that is I gotta have RCS. When I'm building a big rocket, I have to have RCS first. So what are we going to commit on our 90 scale? We can get two of them. Before, what I picked up was heavy rocketry, which got us these parts, and fuel, which got us a whole bunch of fuel systems, including, what the heck is a drain valve? What if you fail to attach a fuel pipe at all? Huh. This would be a good thing to use on a test rocket. You know, so at the end I wanted to test something that would have been great if I could have drained the fuel from those two, so we had only that final stage, and then let my final stage handle circularization and return to test those phases. So that will come in handy. The fuel duct, I'm thinking that getting the larger fuel tanks and the fuel ducting will be useful even if we don't have the heavy rocketry. So that's still a good thing. So of these two, I'm going to want fuel systems first. The other critical thing I need is going to be RCS. Now, advanced construction. This includes a radial decoupler, which will be much more useful for the solid rocket boosters that I didn't use. It includes adapters. So advanced construction and heavy rocketry kind of come together, but I think they have to come later when I can start getting more science again. Landing, this will be something I need when I am going to be landing on MUN, if I'm going to be landing a ship that has to take off, because I will need heavier duty landing struts than what I've got now. Advanced flight control is our RCS. That's what I missed on this one. We cannot maneuver on orbit with large mass vehicles without RCS, unless we want to fire up our main engines, and that destroys our orbit. Our other alternatives are space exploration, which is, well, we can take more people, We can add ladders on the outside so we can move people around on the spacecraft. We can jump down. We have RoveMax, which is a better wheel for landers. So this is all lander stuff. We'll need this once we start actually setting foot on Mun. Miniaturization is stack separators and docking ports. We will need docking ports when we start doing Apollo-style missions. We also will need docking ports when we start setting up space stations. I'm beginning to think that aside from sending, Kerbals out to go orbit Mun, maybe once we've orbited Mun, maybe we step back and we start setting up some satellites in orbit around Kerbin, and maybe a space station in orbit around Kerbin, and get some experience docking in orbit around Kerbin, where we can rescue people because we know how to rescue people, before we go to the extra step of trying to dock around Mun. So maybe the whole docking thing is later. And we've got electrics. We also, in theory, we could take this 260 and we could spend 1 point here and we could put another point in the 160 column. Let's look at what we've got here. We've got advanced electronics, which gets us lights, better batteries, better solar panels. I think we will need that later, but not yet. Precision engineering gets us smaller parts and relay antennas, better ladders, command modules. This is the Apollo style command module, and here is the cupola that you see on the space station. Cool stuff. Lunar excursion vehicle. Okay, this is specifically a vehicle for landing on Mun and returning. So I believe that this is the technology that we will want before we try to do a landing on Mun. Specialized control gets us a beefier reaction wheel, which means we don't need to use RCS on some things, but it also gets us better monoprop tanks. So there we go. Aerodynamics, flight, actuators, more robotic stuff, grabbing units. This comes in handy if you want to bring back a part from space or if you want to attach to an asteroid. Once you've done fuel systems, you can go advanced fuel systems, and that gets you, let's see, all these adapters and bigger fuel tanks. Okay. Precision propulsion is tiny tinies. So very, very small engines, including separatrons. So the solid rocket boosters, normally when you discard them, they just kind of float away. And I have aerodynamic tricks you saw me try to pull there to do that. Separatrons, you saw those in action already. Those strap-on tanks that I used, the liquid fuel tanks that had the built-in separatrons. You saw what happened there. We jettisoned them, and they jetted away. That was really great. You can do this now on everyone, but we're not there yet. And heavier rocketry. So once we've got heavy rocketry, this gets us our Poodle, Skipper, and Bobcat. You saw the Bobcat. The Bobcat worked really well. The Skipper worked fairly well. I didn't try the Poodle. But the Poodle was definitely an on-orbit engine. This might be an interesting engine to use for like translunar injection style things. Heavier rocketry gets us the mainsail. I remember the mainsail from years ago. This is totally the workhorse engine of the large engine crowd. It has high thrust. It has decent operation in atmosphere. The Cheetah, I don't think I've used the Cheetah before. Not sure the size of this thing. Long distance trips? Well, the engine ISP, this is a vacuum engine. And then we've got the Skiff, which is also a vacuum engine. I will have to try those out. And thoroughbred and twin bore. And there's a very large engine, Kodiak, 247, 260, not hugely efficient. Oh, that's vacuum. So ISP 285 to 300, still decent. Multiple cowling options and no gimbal. So this will require vernier engines. We'll have to see where that's useful. Anyway, so I think that what I'm going to try for my next run is to get RCS going and fuel going, and we'll do the same thing we just did, but without the larger engines. And I'm going to go experiment with that, and I will come back and try that in another stream. So we'll see you then.